Hi everybody, I'm Matt Biilmann, co-founder and CEO of Netlify. It's great to be back at the Reactathon, this time in this online virtual edition, to talk about the Jamstack architecture and Netlify, our end-to-end platform for managing modern web properties. When we think about web properties, 10 years ago, if I had gone to most designers and told them that today their main design tool will no longer be a desktop application like Photoshop and Illustrator, it'll just be a URL they open in the browser, they probably wouldn't have believed me. But with tools like Figma, that's really becoming the case. Office suites, coding environment, the modern browser is an amazing, powerful platform that we can build deep and engaging user experiences with. But traditionally, to build these, we've had to manage, provision, operate tons of infrastructure, database servers, application servers, web servers, load balancers, CDN distribution, setting up caching rules, cache purges, invalidations, all of this. It's traditionally been a really complex system to operate web properties at scale. This is one of the things that we've really worked to try to change with Netlify and with Jamstack as an architectural approach. The idea behind both Netlify and the Jamstack is this idea of like, how much can we pre-build up front? Instead of running this whole stack with all these complex servers, all this infrastructure, can we run a build step and then take the output as a pre-built web application or website and distribute it to a CDN with nodes all over the world? And at Netlify, we really saw that if we could do that, we could also tie it into this Git-centric workflow that most of us as developers have already adopted, working through branches, pull requests, commits, and so on, and just expecting that the deploys will flow to the edge from each of those. We also quickly started seeing that content updates could be pulled in during build time from headless CMSs like Contentful or Sanity or Cosmic and deployed directly to the edge as well, and build an orchestration system for tying all of that together. The same even with data updates. A lot of those can be accessed at build time, pre-processed, and deployed globally. Now, this approach with the Jamstack is not just about like building static sites from different data sources and so on. It's really about a mental model where we start reversing the traditional flow of a web request response cycle. So with the traditional way we build web applications, every request from the browser would go through this whole stack of a request and response cycle involving sometimes a CDN, then passing through to a web server, an application server that would then talk to all of our APIs and services, to our main database and to our search cluster, generate HTML, and then send that HTML back to the browser. Now, with the new sort of modern serverless world, of course, we can keep the exact same architecture. We can run serverless functions that just connect to our APIs and services, to our database, to our search cluster, and send a response back to the client. And that's one way of using serverless, but it comes with all of the sort of traditional trade-offs of this architecture and the time it takes to go through this request response cycle. With the Jamstack approach, we try to really shorten the distance to the user and sort of reverse the flow of the request response cycle. So instead of having the browser talk to an application server that will talk to an API on every request, we try to just have our pre-compute step, our build service that just talks to APIs, talk to databases, talk to our search cluster, pre-build as much as possible up front, and then send it out in advance to edge node. And this means that the actual request from the user's browser just hit an edge node, get a pre-built HTML site, and we'll get a response to the user in milliseconds. Incredibly fast, great user experience. Now, of course, we might still have a whole runtime. We might be building an application like app.netlify.com that we can't completely pre-build up front. But there's no reason that we shouldn't just shorten the distance to the APIs and services as well. Why go through that whole stack of CDNs, of load balancers, of web servers, application servers to talk to our APIs and services if we can just do it straight from the browser or through the edge network? This allows some of these services like Algolia or FaunaDB or the like to in themselves be globally distributed and to in themselves build really advanced, hard to imitate caching infrastructures that'll give the user incredibly fast response times. Now, for this build step where we pre-build everything up front, we've seen this whole movement of different frameworks and site generators emerge. Tools like 11t or Scully for Angular or Nuxt for Vue, Hugo as a really fast Go-based generator, and Zap or Gritsum, Next.js. There's like, if you go to jamstack.org, you can find a massive list on them. If we take Next.js as an example, it's become like a really important site generator tool and application framework for the React community. It allows you to group pages just based on a convention, and based on the name of your file, it'll generate like a pre-built page that we can distribute directly to the edge at build time. You can fetch data at build time through the get static props method, and we'll know that like if you use Netlify's build system will run this. It'll pre-build all the different URLs and distribute them with an atomic deploy directly to the edge, handling all the assets. Now, traditionally, when we had web servers, we didn't just use them to serve responses. We also had a set of like sort of typically declarative compute rules around like routing rules, redirect rules, rewrite rules, and so on. And on Netlify, we allow you to do all of these things directly at the edge as well through our Netlify toml config format or our _redirects format. Again, we really tie into this Git-centric workflow. So it's this core idea that you can just add a file to your repository, either a Netlify toml file or a redirect file. This is just a really simple example of a redirects file that just defines simple like 301 redirects from one destination to another. This is an example of a toml redirect that's a bit more complex, that will say like if the language of the end user is set to English and the country is the United States, then do this redirect, and otherwise don't do it. So we can build like complex localized version of our app and have the edge nodes directly handle this logic. Apart from distributing these pre-built HTML pages and running routing rules, of course, sometimes you also have to actually build custom API endpoint that your front end can talk to. Sometimes you'll have services like Stripe that you can talk to directly, but often you might even when you're talking to those need a secret or need something that runs server side. At Netlify, we've embraced this serverless paradigm in terms of serverless functions, where you can just add a functions folder to your repository, and every file there will be set up with routing based on conventions. So in this example, we just have a hello.js that'll automatically respond under .netlify/function/hello. Now, if you're using Next.js, you can also use these functions to actually go back to sort of the traditional server-side rendered approach just by saying get server-side props instead of get static props. You do the same cycle, talk to your data source, but by marking this as get server-side props, we'll actually like delegate this to a server-side function that will generate the page you request on demand. This comes, of course, with a lot of the same trade-offs that we've had with traditional server-side architectures. We can add layers of caching in front of it and so on. But when you can, you should still try to see, can we pre-build as much as possible up front? That'll always be the fastest, the most secure, and the most predictable. Sometimes you'll also need to run background processes. Like let's take the subscription example. You might have a function that's a quick API endpoint that adds a new subscriber to a plan. But then once you do that, you might do a bunch of steps. You might send a new email, you might add them to a marketing automation system, and so on. With Netlify, we have a concept called background functions, and it's just as simple as serverless functions. You just append -background to any function, and now when you trigger it, instead of immediately giving a response, you'll just trigger a background process that can run up to 15 minutes. Great for scheduled tasks or these kind of background operations that you do when something happens. Another really interesting aspect of this architecture is again like this edge layer where we just talked about routing, right? Like language-based versioning and so on. We also just at Netlify introduced a new functionality that we talk about as edge handlers. This is for when the declarative set of routing rules just don't cut it. Let's say you want to really build advanced personalization or authentication based on very detailed rules, or you want to build API gateway-like functionality where you can route to authenticated services directly from the edge node. With Netlify's edge handlers, you can simply add an edge handlers folder to your Git repository and start writing edge handlers just like you would write your serverless functions. These can really intercept this request response cycle, and you should typically use them for things that you can do within a few milliseconds. Again, we don't want to go back to this old style architecture of everything being part of a very long request response cycle. But for example, let's say you just want to check an authorization header if someone accesses a secret part of your site and you want to do some custom logic in response to that. This would be a little edge handler that you could write that do this. Imagine you want to serve like a specific set of JavaScript, a specific bundle of JavaScript to mobile browsers and another one to desktop browsers. I don't recommend this, but you would totally write an edge handler that would just look at the user agent and then decide which bundle version to serve directly from the edge network. So just to put these different pieces together, like when you build with the Jamstack and when you build on Netlify, the types of primitives we offer is, first of all, the pre-compute layer. That's really our build service. You can run a long process here that can stitch together hundreds of thousands of HTML pages, and our service will push the ones that change directly to the edge and prepare them there. These will be delivered to the end user almost instantly, and it's always sort of the fastest, the most secure, the simplest to reason about that you can do. Then we have this layer of routing and transformations that split between like our declarative route engine in TOML files or underscore redirects, and then edge handlers where you can fully program the edge layer. Then there's the serverless functions that can run in a few seconds, like typically great for API endpoint, microservices, or glue layer, or even for server-side rendering, like with get server-side props in Next. And then background functions for when you need compute that takes longer, when you don't want to be trapped inside a request response cycle, when you want to trigger a job and just run it in the background, do actions, and trigger requests. As you can see, like at Netlify, we're really building out this whole platform around the Jamstack architectural approach that makes it incredibly easy to write great user experiences with great performance without ever having to work with operating servers, maintaining infrastructure, or thinking about complex deployment systems or pipelines. You just work in Git, you follow a few clear conventions, and our platform will take care of all of the operations and infrastructure for you. If you're interested specifically in how we handle Next.js, since this is so focused on React, and Next.js is of course really popular in the React world right now, go to netlify.com/with/Next.js and read much more about it. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the conference.